Hi everyone, welcome to our discussion related to trading place names. And so we're going to be talking about this place name shell game that has been going on for, we don't really know how long this has been going on, quite frankly, but we do know at least centuries we've had this dynamic going on where there has been a process of trading place names and renaming places and duplicate place names. And all of this has painted a global picture of confusion. The reason why this is so important is because naming geographical spaces, the naming has historically been tied to the people who were inhabiting the space. So this would include land, water, and other natural elements. But what we have going on when you look around the world, and we're going to be focusing on the Americas, but when you look around the world, you have a dynamic of someone going around duplicating place names and appropriating place names. It means stealing something and then reusing it for their own. And so you'll sometimes have one place name and it's duplicated in a number of places all around the world. And so it makes it very difficult to really get a clear handle on what is the original name of the space and who are the original people in that space, and who actually owns that place name that's being used in multiple places. And you also have another dynamic, and this may be a somewhat innocent dynamic, but it's built on narcissism. And so you have this narcissistic naming dynamic where some people may have innocently adopted or appropriated names of famous places. And so you'll see this with things like Rome and Greece and Egypt. Any place that had notoriety in terms of history. And so all of this, in terms of these naming practices, all of it leads to a process of deception. And so it leads to a lot of confusion. And one confusing piece is that then people rely on this and extrapolate from it and then come up with theories that go along with it. And so you will have people believing when something is named a particular thing in current times that that is the ancient place. That's the ancient place, and that's the reason why it has the place name. So it's important to look at this dynamic of these duplicate names. And so you'll see that it's not really clear where these places are, where they started. And we're also going to look at what gives rise to this, because there's so much deception and rewriting of history over time that there has to be some underpinning for all of this pathology, because it's pathology and then it creates more pathology. And what even happens is that this release of data, we've been inundated with data and information. Some of that may not even be real. And so we are depending on that, where it's talking about history has been rewritten. But it's not clear that even this is the truth, because we don't know where the rewriting started, who started the rewriting, and whether or not we are in a successive period of rewriting. Now we're going to be talking about duping, duplications, and rewriting history, and why this appears to be occurring. This is a psychological dynamic that's going on here, and it's a process of gaslighting, and then a process of this duping delight where there is pleasure being gained based upon these deceptions. Now we're going to look at some very concrete examples of these duplicate place names, but it's important to first talk about, and we're just going to talk about this in a very rudimentary way. We're not going to go in depth about it, but this is a gaslighting process, and gaslighting is a psychological abuse tactic. And the entire purpose of it is to make people or groups of people question their hold on reality. And so people are targeted, they serve as prey, and this whole process takes place in order to make people question their perceptions, their recollections, their memory. And so it's a very convoluted dynamic that goes on. And then the targeted individuals or groups, or the prey, they are duped into believing the deceiver's narrative. And this can take place in a number of ways. But one of the ways that this is apparently taking place is through this renaming process. And so you've seen this renaming process go on all over the world. And people usually attribute it to colonialism But there's something else going on with that. And even colonialism in and of itself is a narcissistic process. And so you're talking about some psychopaths no matter how you are looking at this. And then you have individuals historically who have taken pleasure in this entire process. And so it's this narcissistic, psychopathic process, narcopath process of people really getting joy from manipulating and controlling and deceiving other people. And particularly when you can get something like this is a very long con. So you've got all these long cons going on, and individuals and groups of people involved in the long con, either as the people targeting or the people being targeted. And remember, fruit doesn't fall that far from the tree. So if you had some narcissistic, psychopathic ancestors hundreds of years ago, they usually would pass down a little bit of that to their children. And so you have this process that's been going on for forever with all of this duping and creating all of this murkiness in terms of who people are and where people are and the names of these places. And so we're going to look at some of these examples. So now we're going to look at some of these examples of these duping duplications and how history has been rewritten and why it is so confusing. And so people are cautioned about using these place names as proof positive, as unmitigated proof positive that a particular people lived in a particular place, or that the place is actually historically relevant. And you will see this a lot in the Americas, where there is significant use of ancient place names, but then you will see those place names in other places around the world. We're going to start off with that root of India. You can start off with the root of IND or END or ENDIA or INDIA. And so you can see here, some people believe that because you see this word in the United States, that it means something specific. And so people will believe that this means that this is the original India. And what you will see is that this root India appears in a number of places, even when you interchange the E and the I. And so you see this root of India appearing primarily in the United States. However, you see it spread out. You've got it in Indiana, you've got Indiana, and then you have Pennsylvania. You have a number of places with the name Indiana in Pennsylvania, then in Iowa, Brazil, Costa Rica. Then you go over, when you change out that I for the E, you see that this root India appears in Indonesia, Portugal, and Canada. And so it's important to really consider, what does this root even mean if you see it in so many different places? Moving right along, you see this dynamic also using state names, Louisiana and Georgia, for example. You see that Louisiana, of course, is a state in the United States, but you also see that Louisiana is a place in Australia. Not only is it in Australia, it's in New South Wales, Australia. And so you've got a number of dynamics going on right there. You also see it located in Costa Rica, Guyana, Liberia, South Africa. So this is a bit much. And so it's very difficult to really get a handle on where is the original Louisiana. And again, this is not a name that those who would be considered the indigenous people of the Americas would have been using. This is a transplanted name. And so it's highly unlikely that those individuals would have been calling themselves Louisianans or people who live in Louisiana. That's probably not what they were saying, because this, again, is a transplanted place name. And this is the case with most of the names in the Americas. And so the languages that were used by the indigenous people would not be consistent with these place names. And so you also see Georgia. You see there, of course, is a state called Georgia, but remember, Georgia is a republic in Europe, and you also have Georgia in a number of places in the United States outside of the state of Georgia. And so the likelihood that all of these places are the original place known as Georgia, it's slim to none. Moving right along, we're going to use the example of Utah and Alabama. Of course, Utah is very important because people place religious significance on this name Utah, and because it appears in America, people are led to believe that this is the original Utah, meaning Judah, and it's located in the United States. But what you can see is this name Utah actually appears in a number of places. And so you have Utah, the state, and then you also have, Utah County. You also see Utah, that name popping up in Colorado. You see that name popping up in Afghanistan. You see this name popping up in Papua New Guinea. And you see this name popping up in Peru, the root of it. And so the likelihood, again, that all of these places are the original Utah is slim to none. And one placing one's hat on this name appearing in the United States does not mean that this is the original place of Judah. And so this is very confusing because you have a religious dynamic even going on with the naming. And so you have a group of people who used that name, and in that particular place there are a number of historical dynamics with the group of people who moved into that region. And so it's important to understand the group of people who moved into that region and what that might have been all about. Again, you have Alabama, another state name, and so you see the name Alabama being very prevalent in America. But then it gets very interesting because you have Alabama, of course, the state. Then you have Alabama appearing in New York. You have Alabama appearing in California, Belize. You have Alabama appearing in South Africa. And continuing on with this little game here, you see Jamaica. Now, Jamaica, of course, is an island country. But interestingly, you see Jamaica appearing in Massachusetts. You see Jamaica appearing in Vermont, Virginia, Illinois, Brazil, Colombia. This is quite a dispersion in terms of this name Jamaica. Again, calling into question, how did this name come about? How did this name come to be in so many different places in the Americas? Again, is this a transplanted name? We've talked about Jamaica before. And this does appear to be a transplanted name, although you do see a variation of it in the Taino language. Now, what's also interesting is Hawaii. And so you can see Hawaii appearing in a number of places. You've got the state, the island state known as Hawaii. But then you see Hawaii and parts of Hawaii appearing in different places. You see it in Guatemala, for instance. And we're going to look at this root that has in it the makings of Dominica and also Dominican and Dominica. And so you can see that a number of places hold this root. And so you see it in the Dominican Republic. You see this name popping up again in Costa Rica. You see this name in Cuba. And then ultimately you see this name in France. Again, looking over to the right-hand side for Guinea, you see that Guinea, most people think of Guinea and they're thinking of it as being in Africa. But you can see that Guinea pops up in a number of places. You see it popping up in Barbados. You see the root popping up in Colombia. And so a question then is, so where is the true Guinea? Now you have a number of dynamics with these colonizers going around to different places. Might be the same colonizers going around to different places, giving these confusing place names. And some of these colonizers were specifically coming out of that Iberia area. Now the understanding is that they were running from the Inquisition. But it's very interesting that in running from the Inquisition that the people had time, some of them had time to create all of this havoc all over the world. Next, we have the examples of Haiti and Barbados. Now, what's interesting about Haiti is that not only do you have the country Haiti, but you have the name and the root of Haiti appearing in China multiple times, and it's appearing as Haitian or Haitian. You also see Haiti popping up in Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Now, the Dominican Republic makes perfect sense. However, the other ones do not make sense in terms of this duplication. And so where is the true Haiti, and where did this name originate from? You have also this example of Barbados and the root of Barbados, of course, in Barbados, but you also see it popping up in Brazil and related to Monmouthshire. And so this is a very odd dynamic with this duplication of names. And then you have to ask, like, what was the original purpose, and what is the continuing purpose of doing this? Next up, we have the Bahamas and Bermuda, and you can see here, you typically think of the Bahamas, you think about the islands of the Bahamas, but here you see Bahama pops up in North Carolina, and then interestingly it pops up twice in Sierra Leone. Then you go over to Bermuda, and it gets even more interesting because of course you have Bermuda in the islands, and then you have Bermuda popping up in South Africa. So Bermuda is the name of a place in South Africa. Bermuda is the name of a place in England. Now, of course, this makes sense because this is where this name is emerging from. You also have Bermuda showing up in California, and then you have Bermuda showing up in North Carolina. So now we're going to look at Mexico and Brazil. And you see the roots of Mexico, you see the name Mexico not only appearing in Mexico, but you see the name appearing in Missouri, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Cuba. And so again, the question becomes, where is the origin of this? You also have Brazil, and you see Brazil, of course, the country known as Brazil, but then you see Brazil popping up in terms of geography in Tennessee in the United States. You see it popping up in terms of that root in Jamaica, in Serbia, in Portugal. Of course, it would pop up in Portugal. But then you also see it popping up where? Russia. Now we see Alaska and Cairo. Now, of course, Cairo is another one of those examples of people appropriating that name, perhaps based upon the history. And so people want to be attached to a history like Egypt or Cairo. And so starting off with Alaska, though, of course, you have Alaska, you have the state Alaska, but you also see the name popping up for Alaska in Minnesota. And then it jumps down to Costa Rica and then Nicaragua. And so it brings up the question, where is the real Alaska, and which place is the original, which place is the duplicate, why are these places named such? And then let's go over to Cairo. So you see, of course, Cairo popping up in Egypt. That makes sense. But you will often hear people refer to America as Egypt based upon finding places like Memphis or Cairo in the Americas, and not stopping to consider that this might just be some narcissistic name appropriation. And so you also see Cairo popping up in Mississippi, you see Cairo popping up in Minnesota, Oregon, and then you see Cairo pop up in Italy a few times, and then even the root of it in Angola. And so are all of these places Cairo? Can you use this name appearing in some place as proof positive that that is the original Cairo? So now we have Memphis and Tennessee. Now, of course, again, Memphis is related to Africa. And so here you might have people asserting that Africa is really in America because you find a place called Memphis in America. Now, that would only be the case if Memphis is actually all of these places. And so you have this name Memphis spread out from Tennessee to New York to Michigan, Florida, Alabama, Indiana. That's quite a bit of spread for that, all of that to be a place named Memphis. Then you also have Tennessee. And most people think of Tennessee as a state in the United States. But then you see Tennessee popping up in places such as Oregon and Texas and Australia. So now we're going on to Nevada and Oceania. So you see Nevada, of course, the state of Nevada, but then you see Nevada, that name spread out from Arkansas to California to Illinois to Minnesota to Colorado, and then Bosnia and Colombia. Oceania is an actual place, but then you see the name attached to places such as Colombia. Continuing on with Kentucky and Florida, we see the name Kentucky, of course, the state of Kentucky, but then Kentucky starts to appear in some unusual places. And so you see the name Kentucky appearing New South Wales, Australia. You see Kentucky appearing in New South Wales, Australia. Then you see Kentucky appearing in Namibia. Kentucky also appears in Arkansas. Then we jump over to the state of Florida, and Florida is quite spread out also. So Florida, of course, is the state, but then you see the root of Florida appearing in Colombia, Uruguay. You see it in Puerto Rico. You see it in New Jersey and New York. And so this is quite a bit of spread in terms of that name, Florida. We're going to first look at Antigua. And you see that the name Antigua not only appears as a place in the Americas, but you see Antigua is attached to Australia. You also see Antigua appearing in Bolivia, Chile, Cuba, Guatemala, and Honduras. Next, we have the place name Armenia. Now, oddly, there is a place called Armenia, but then you see this name pop up in Colombia. Again, you see the name pop up in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Bolivia. And so again, you see these names popping up all over the place, and somebody is giving these places these names, appropriating these names over and over again. And we're going to be wrapping this up as an ending for this discussion, but the beginning of another one and some other place names. Now, some people will also use names such as Moab and Ammon to prove that this is the original land of the descendants of Lot. And so it's important to make note of this name, these names appearing in multiple places outside of the Americas, which then brings into question which place is this original place, this original land space that would be attributed to Lot. And so you see the root of Moab appearing in Germany, Washington in the United States. You see this name appearing in the Republic of the Congo and then the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You see Gabon. You also see Mozambique. You also see the name Ammon appearing in Virginia, Idaho, Italy, and Germany. And so this is quite a bit of diversity in terms of where these names are appearing. And again, remember that part of this whole dynamic is a duping dynamic. And so you've got appropriation and then you've got duping, but you've got someone going around giving these place names to a variety of places, and in doing so creating quite a bit of historic confusion, because any of these places can claim to be the original space for Moab or Ammon. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of what is going on with these place names, and also helps you to not become too attached to the narratives that have been given about these place names. If you remember earlier on, we were talking about this dynamic where you see places and people in Africa actually appearing also in India. And so you really have to question what's going on there. Where's the original place? Why are these names appearing in multiple places? There has to be an explanation for it. And so don't be so quick to jump to the conclusion that just because you see a place name in one particular place, that it is proof positive that the people originated there and that that is the original place name. Explore a little bit more, and just remember, most of this historical stuff that we are addressing is related to historical revision. So there are going to be all sorts of lies and deceptions going on with respect to these narratives. And so it makes it very difficult to determine to ascertain whether the narrative that you have right now that appears to be revealed, these new revelations, this apocalypse, whether what you're getting right now is even the truth, because this could just be another rewriting that is presented to the public to deceive them yet again and take them away from whatever the actual truth happens to be. And so it's important to remember that there are all sorts of dynamics related to iconoclasm going on that contribute to this deception dynamic, this gaslighting. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just remember that is what is going on. There is a big, giant global gaslighting process going on. It's been going on for at least centuries. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.